everyone, and welcome to the 5th episode of Otaku Field Notes. Thank you so much for joining me today. I am your host, Seiji, and without further ado, let's get into all of the stuff I want to talk about. So, I ended up finishing the entire season of Mieruko-chan, and I do have to say that the show has really grown on me. I don't know if it was because I was feeling a bit emotional on the day that I watched the remaining 8 episodes, but I just had such a good time. For a series with the premise of high school girl tries to ignore creepy spirits, lol, it's surprisingly deep. When I first read the manga, I didn't really think too much of it, but my experience seeing it animated has been completely different. I think this is one of those series where I feel like the anime is just as good, perhaps even better than the manga. Or maybe it's better for me to say that the anime does an incredibly good job of enhancing the feel of the story. I think that in general the animation was really good, although I did feel that the length of some of the still frames were held on for just a tad bit too long, in the sense that I would notice it and sometimes think that the show was buffering or something like that. I don't know if this was done because of there being a time constraint or it was just me. In any case, I don't think it was that much of a deal. Also, surprisingly, I really like the CGI that was used in the show. It's only done, or at least as far as I know, it's only done for the spirits, and it worked very well in my opinion. It does a great job of differentiating them from the rest of the world, but at the same time, it isn't that obvious that I felt that they were really out of place. Talking about spirits, I do have to say though that the creepiest one in my opinion of the entire show was the one in the tunnel when Miko and Yulia were trying to help Hana to take pictures. I honestly have no idea how this escaped me when I was reading the manga, but that ghost was clearly a murder victim. I think that she got killed and then was chained and put into the barrel and then dumped somewhere near that tunnel. Seeing her legs and arms come out of the barrel was so freaking unsettling. It was definitely one of the creepiest parts of the show, in my opinion. Of course, we also have Miko's father who passed away the year before, and that was so freaking sad. Like, I knew that he was dead from the start, but just seeing him try to apologize for not being able to make up for taking Miko's pudding the year before was just, it was so heartbreaking. And also, there was this other scene where Miko returns an old lady with memory issues back to her daughter, and the lady's deceased husband tries to give Miko the code to a safe that is in the house so that she can then give it to his wife. Miko at first doesn't understand and is, as usual, freaked out by the ghost, but eventually she ends up typing in the code on her phone and she shows it to the lady, and instantly the lady goes into the house to the safe and opens it, and there she picks this hairpin that her husband gave her, and then like some of her memory comes back, and oh my gosh, I was literally bawling at that scene. It was so emotional. I think one thing that definitely helped with those scenes was the soundtrack. Just in general, with all different types of scenes, the soundtrack that was accompanying the scenes was just really good. It made the scary scenes extra scary and the emotional scenes even more emotional. You know, one thing though that I can't really get over with this show is its dichotomy. So the thing is that you have so much deep stuff going on. I mean, you have everything from like loss to abuse, and then all of a sudden there's this random fan service involving teenage characters. It's just so incredibly cringe. I mean, one moment something really, really deep and emotional is going on, and then all of a sudden there's a titty shot. You know, it's just so incredibly confusing and jarring in a sense. Also, they did my girl Yulia so dirty with that slow panning view of her in the shower. I hated it so much. I mean, she's such a cute character, and what's more is that she looks like an 11-year-old. She is modeled like an 11-year-old. It was so unnecessary to show her butt in the series. I don't know. I'm not gonna go on a rant about fan service again. I already did a video about that on my main channel a while back. But it's just very disappointing when it happens in a show that I feel like would have been so much better if it weren't for the fan service, if that makes any sense. In any case, Yulia's character arc, by the way, is just so much fun. I just really loved seeing how her relationship with Hana and Miko was developing and how she slowly was starting to open up and accept them as friends. So incredibly wholesome. I'm also super excited to see how she and Miko will do in the future when it comes to all this spirit stuff, because yeah, I just think that she's such a good addition to the cast because it allows Miko to actually talk about what's going on around her in the world without, you know, dragging everyone in her life into this entire mess. I also felt that she added a lot to the comedic relief of the show. The whole assumption that Miko is this huge spiritual guru was just so funny to me, and I thought it was also very cute how she's consistently trying to compete with Miko whilst Miko is just trying to be a good friend to her. It was just so cute. Yeah, so I really do hope that this anime will get a second season. There's definitely enough material for it because now I'm pretty sure that this season covered about 3 volumes and a couple of chapters of the 4th one, and right now I think the 6th one just came out. So maybe like in a year or two, you know, we might see a second season, who knows? But I'm pretty sure that this anime did quite well this season, so yeah, I'm just hoping. Anyway, let's move on to the next anime I wanted to talk about, and this one is actually a really short one. It's called Deji Meets Girl, and one episode is about 2 minutes long, including an ED, which makes up a fourth of the runtime. So in reality, it's about 1.5 minutes long. The story is that of a young idol guy called Ichiro who for some reason flees to Okinawa. Anyway, he stays at this hotel that is owned by the father of a girl named Maise. After his arrival, weird things start to happen at the hotel that for the most part only Maise and Ichiro notice. Like for instance, the hotel becoming completely submerged in water. The first thing I'd like to say is that I think that the animation style is super appealing. It's very vibrant and cute. I also really like how it's set in Okinawa. However, the storyline is so inoffensive and uninteresting as you can imagine. I'd say that if you want to look at something that is incredibly visually pleasing but has not really a lot of substance, then go for it. But I would not recommend this anime for the plot or the character development or anything other than just the visuals. The ending was also incredibly abrupt, so much so that I felt that I had like mental whiplash. I was so confused as to what the conclusion really was. So my understanding of the show is that this guy Ichiro passed an idol audition back in 2019, and thus was at that time at the cusp of his career. But then, as we all know, a certain virus hit the world, and naturally his career took a blow and started going downhill because, concerts and other projects just got cancelled. And so because of this, he went to Okinawa. He fled Tokyo to just get away from it all. And so, yes, he's at the hotel, and then weird things start happening, and he meets Maise, and Maise gets to know about his story. And then I think it turned out that he asked some spirit from Okinawa to give him success, and then he got it, and then the pandemic happened, and then it was going downhill, and so she was trying to take him or something. There was some weird stuff going on with Okinawan mythology, and eventually Maise ends up motivating him to just keep on going, and that's how the anime ends. So I don't know what was going on, but I felt like a lot was happening, definitely in the last 2 or 3 episodes, that I was just like, where am I? Like the Mr. Krabs meme. So yeah, definitely not one of the best manga or anime that I've seen in recent time. Now, I also want to talk about an anime that I actually watched a couple of months ago, but never really talked about on the podcast, and that is Corpse Party. And this was actually, or is, an adaptation of a visual novel that was made by Kedoin Makoto. I found 2 runs of the series on MAL, namely Corpse Party Missing Footage from 2012 and Corpse Party Tortured Souls, which came out the year after in 2013. So the story of Corpse Party is that there's this group of high schoolers, and one of them is leaving. So they decide to have this last get-together at their school as a farewell party. It's there that they decide to perform a ritual using paper charms in order to promise each other that they'll stay friends forever. However, this ends up sending them to another dimension filled with all types of horrors, to be honest. It turns out that their school was built on top of the grounds of an elementary school that got demolished after it became the scene of a series of brutal murders. And so now these students are trapped in an alternate dimension in which the elementary school still exists, and they now have to try and find a way out of that dimension whilst trying to dodge all these vengeful spirits that are trying to kill them. Now, the Missing Footage anime might have come out earlier, but I honestly wouldn't recommend watching it, or at the very least watch it after you've watched Tortured Souls. So Missing Footage is an 11-minute prequel anime that has a lot of weird and disturbing fan service in it, and it really doesn't do much in terms of adding value to the main story. Now, Tortured Souls is one of the most brutal horror anime I have ever seen. Granted, I watched this at home alone at night, but regardless of that, the gore in this anime was one of the most graphic I have seen within anime. There were many moments where I felt intensely uncomfortable, and I think that for horror lovers, that is definitely this series' strong suit. So many people die in this series that I just got a thrill from trying to guess which of these morons was going to survive this entire ordeal, because they are all such morons. And, the plot is definitely not all that deep and original. And so these characters have to almost always make absolute piss poor decisions in order to, get killed. For instance, the little sister of one of the main characters was just, okay, besides her being really annoying, she kept nagging about how she needed to use the bathroom. And so her brother's like, okay, yeah, just like go into the forest with all these spirits that are trying to kill us, and yeah, you just go off on your own. Surely nothing bad would happen. Impossible. And so it's these type of decisions that really irk me, because it's like, yeah, of course she's going to die if she's going to go off by herself. They're going to kill her for sure. Like, oh my gosh. My elbows agreed. Anyway, hard cack for the ending. Eventually, only a couple of them managed to get back to their own dimension, and they have experienced like the most utterly disturbing events. Anyway, right before the survivors end up going back, one of them decides to, as a way to honor his fallen brethren, he decides to name their names before, doing the ritual that will bring them back. And it's just such a weird situation, because he does it in such an emotionless way that makes it kind of funny, because he's kind of like, Sarah, Stewart, Ginny, Barry, I'll never forget you. Okay, let's go back. Okay, it wasn't that bad, but it kind of gave me that vibe. And also, the funniest thing about this is the person who did this eventually, okay, spoiler alert, although this anime is really old, but he ends up not returning, because the thing that makes you able to return back to the original dimension is having that paper charm, the original one that was given to you at the start of the anime. And he lost his own, and I believe he took the one of someone who died. And so and so at the end you think, okay, all these people have survived. Great. Good for you. You weren't as dumb as your classmates. And so they're holding hands and they're reciting some stuff, and they get back. And it's only this dude's arms that get transported. And it's like, no! Because the people who are left are just completely in shock, because they're just literally holding a severed arm. I don't know why it was so funny, but yeah, the survivors end up traumatized, so, everyone loses in the end. But yeah, it was just incredibly goofy. But if you like horror, I would definitely recommend you give this one a go. It's not an entire season, it's an OVA. I believe there are about 6 episodes or something. So yeah, watch it. Now, another horror anime that I watched was Higurashi When They Cry. This one is, funnily enough, also based on a visual novel, but not by the same person who did Corpse Party. This one was created by someone who goes by the username Ryukishi07. I started watching the anime last year because everyone said that the English voice acting was so gosh darn awful, it became entertaining. So I went off and found the dub on Netflix and just had it as kind of like background noise whilst I was studying. And this is how I ended up getting sucked into the series or franchise and watched all 100. I watched all 100 episodes. Why? I don't know why I did this to myself. So anyway, the story is set in the 80s in this very tiny village in the mountains called Hinamizawa. So In the summer of 1983, a boy called Keiichi Maibara moves to the town and gets transferred to the Seoul primary school that is there. There are about 20 or so students enrolled since it's such a tiny town, and Keiichi eventually becomes friends with 4 of the students there who are all girls. You have Mion and Rena, who are his age mates, and then 2 younger girls by the names of Satoko and Rika, who also happen to live together on their own because both of their parents are deceased. So the premise of the show is that there is this thing called the Oyashiro curse, where each year after the town's festival, people die or disappear. So it's just a lot of weird stuff that is happening in this town. Now, this curse seems to be connected to a virus that makes people go crazy, with them doing, rather drastic things such as killing people and scratching their necks open. Now, okay, so this is just a very surface level explanation. The story is far more convoluted than what my summary might indicate. The main shtick of the story is that the people seem to be trapped in a time loop. So the story of this virus or curse taking over the village gets repeated over and over and over again, and every loop you either get a new perspective of what's happening or the story changes somewhat. And this is how you learn about what exactly is going on in Hinamizawa and what these kids have to do with all of that. So, like I said before, I've basically watched all of the episodes, and I honestly wonder why, because I'm not particularly a fan of the show, but I somehow always find myself returning to this show. Maybe as like a form of comfort, who knows? I think the best way to describe this is like, those white crackers you get at the supermarket that are kind of bland and not particularly tasty, but sometimes you'll find them in the pantry, and out of sheer boredom, you end up just eating all of them. That is how I feel about Higurashi, especially the last season. So, spoiler alert for those who haven't watched that season or the previous one called Go. Yeah. Okay, so my memory is a bit foggy when it comes to the details of the plot, but I'm going to try and give like the core information. So we now know that Rika, one of the little girls, is the one who's truly stuck in this time loop, and she manages to eventually get out and leaves the town in order to go to a private school with her best friend Satoko. There, however, Satoko isn't able to fit in, and this leads to a chain of events where she eventually ends up gaining powers where she can reset the time loop by killing Rika first and then herself. And so, Rika first thought that she had escaped this time loop, and then all of a sudden she's found herself back again in Hinamizawa. And so we find out that Satoko is the one who caused this kind of like time loop 2.0. So this is all known at the end of Go. And so when I started Sotsu, I thought that we were going to see some plot progress, but not really. Instead, they decided to rehash like a good 60% of Sotsu so that we get to see all those events with the knowledge that it is actually Satoko who is causing all these people to go mad and kill each other, thus resetting the time loop for Rika. I actually wouldn't have minded flashbacks and seeing things from Satoko's perspective, but it was far too overpowering, and lots of the shots weren't new either. I think that might have been really my biggest point. The 2 points actually, just how much time they spent going like, look at all of this stuff. This is everything that happened here is because of Satoko. And then them just reusing a lot of the scenes from Gore, like just like scene by scene. It was very weird because I was like, I'm pretty sure I've seen this already, and it looks almost identical. You get like new shots here and there, but for the most part it really did feel like a rehashing of the previous season. So yeah, I just kind of felt very disappointed by the small amount of new material that we got in this season. And, you know, I know that repetition is at the center of the show, but this was just a bit too much, in my opinion. I also didn't really like Satoko's motivation for looping time for what I believe was a good 100 years in order to keep Rika in their hometown, because her motivation is to be together with Rika, right? And things at the boarding school didn't work out because she absolutely hated studying. So if you were to think about it logically, right? She was able to study enough to pass the entrance exams to get into that school. So if she were to study for, I don't know, maybe like a decade or so, in order to get through, you know, the 3 years worth of material that she would need to know to get through high school at that school, she could then, after all of that studying, go off and kill Rika and then herself to reset the time loop. And then she could have just gone through high school without too much of a fuss, because she's already spent like a decade studying this material. Because I mean, like, wouldn't that option be far more preferable than spending over 100 years scheming and killing your best friend and yourself countless of times in order to prevent her dreams from coming true? Because let's be clear about this. This was Rika's dream, to go to that school. And Satoko is so selfish and like, she thinks, she's like, no, I want to be Rika's best friend and she should stay in this old tiny town. I mean, yeah, to be fair, Satoko wasn't thinking logically, but I can't imagine her not realizing at some point in those 100 years how tedious it must be to choose, you know, for that latter option. Also, in the process of Satoko's scheming, her entire relationship with Rika just deteriorates, and it seems at the end even that her obsession with Rika for the most part has turned into hate, essentially. I mean, the way she sometimes ended Rika's life as well was honestly overkill. There was just so much anger in it. So yeah, I don't know. I don't even know why I'm still watching this series, but that's just, yeah, those are just my thoughts on that entire situation. So I also just want to briefly mention that I watched a couple of episodes of Peach Boy Riverside. This is an anime adaptation of a manga by Kyou Shinja. Yeah. So I think I watched about 5 episodes, and in my opinion, it felt like the water of shonen anime. You know, very inoffensive, nothing too exciting or unique, generic fan service as usual, just all the bits and bobs of your standard shonen anime. As far as I understood, the story is set in a fantasy world where you have humans, demi-humans, and oni. So all these groups are constantly at one another's neck. The protagonist is this girl named Sally, who is a princess, and she's OP, but doesn't really seem to understand how and why. In any case, she is on a journey to find this guy who once came to her kingdom and saved it from a couple of Oni by slaying them. On her journey, she meets this demi-human called Frau that looks like a rabbit, which she ends up befriending, and Frau actually decides to accompany Sally on her journey. And yeah, Sally, she is all about unifying humans, demi-humans, and Oni, like the whole peace around the world for generations thing. Anyway, the guy she's after, however, wants to kill all of the demons, or demi-humans and Oni. So, yeah, that's kind of like the synopsis. Nothing too fancy. I do have to say, though, that the entire timeline of this anime was kind of freaked up. It kind of looked like they aired the episodes in the wrong order, which made it very hard for me to follow in like the first 3 or 4 episodes. Like the first episode, Sally finds Frau in the bushes, and the vibe I was getting was that this wasn't the first episode at all, because I ended up checking twice just to make sure that I wasn't watching like a second season of a show, because it just put us just straight up in that anime, and I was like, okay, what's going on here? Then what I remembered from episode 3 was the pacing, which was just at breakneck speed. It seemed like there was this small time skip. We get introduced to a bunch of new characters, and things from the past are revealed, and you know, I was just so confused for most of the time, to be quite frank, and I eventually ended up like putting all the pieces together, but it definitely seemed like they messed up the order of airing. I don't know, but yeah, that's about it. That's about everything I have to say about Peach Boy Riverside. I don't know for sure if I'll be eventually watching an entire season. Maybe if I'm really bored, I might give that a go, but we'll see. In any case, I would like to talk about an anime that I actually enjoyed quite a bit. It's an OVA called Boku no Chikyuu, or Mamotte, or Please Save My Earth. This is the anime adaptation of a highly popular manga series of the same name, created by Higurashi Saki. So the manga originally ran from 1986 until 1994 in the Shoujo magazine Hana to Yume. So that's also, by the way, one of the most popular ones and is still ongoing now. In any case, the series is quite long. It has about 21 volumes in total and has actually been officially translated to the English a while back. I believe they were publishing it in 2004, which is almost like 2 decades ago. But I'm pretty sure it's out of print now, but you can still find a couple of volumes here and there for like a decent price. In any case, the story is about a group of teenagers who seem to be sharing the exact same dreams. So the dreams are that of alien scientists who are living on the moon and are watching and observing the Earth from there. Now, I have only watched the OVA, but I thought it was really cool and I was really interested in picking up the manga. But since there are 21 volumes, I'm just gonna wait for a second until Bookwalker like does their next coin back thingies or so. Also not sponsored, but yeah, for now I'll just have to do with the OVA itself. In any case, it does start off in a very peculiar way. We get introduced to one of the main characters, a high school girl called Sakaguchi Alice. She is described as being a bit of a crybaby, and at the start of the story, she has just moved from Hokkaido to Tokyo. There, she has a 7-year-old neighbor called Rin who has a crush on her and is just constantly teasing her. So the first interaction we see between Alice and Rin is him telling her to close her eyes and open her mouth so that he can give her some chewing gum. For some reason, she agrees, and this dude literally spits his nasty ass chewed up gum into her mouth, and because of the sheer shock of having chewed gum spit into your mouth, she accidentally swallows it. This sets Alice off. She ends up bursting into tears at the dinner table later on, and at this point I'm thoroughly confused as to where this anime is heading towards. Then it gets worse, because now she actually has to babysit this brat Rin, and so she decides to take him to the zoo, where she ends up running into two of her classmates. They end up chatting with one another, and Rin thinks Alice has a crush on one of them. Rin is absolutely devastated by this, and so when they get back to Alice's apartment, he naturally sits on the balcony and threatens to jump off of what seems to be the 15th floor. And I'm just like, what the heck is going on? That went literally from 0 to 100 real quick. And so he's sitting on the balcony fence and talking to Alice, and he decides to drop the plant she bought him at the zoo off the balcony, and of course it shatters. And so she naturally gets pissed off, slaps him in the face, and and that sends him off the balcony. Bruh. Anyway, his fall gets broken by some bushes, but the injuries trigger his memories as one of the moon scientists, and this really gets the ball rolling for the rest of the OVA. And you know, from the way that I'm talking, it seems like a lot to take in, and to be honest, I actually do think that it is. But I think that that's kind of like my general experience when it comes to OVAs of manga, because I think that most of these are made with the idea that the people who are going to be watching this are also going to be familiar in general with the original work. And so I find that with many of these OVAs, they don't really try to explain the entire premise, because that would just take up the already limited time that OVAs run for anyway. In any case, this one consists of 6 episodes, and the series really starts to pick up after the first 2 episodes. So in episode 3, a major plot point gets revealed that really drew me into the story. And then after that, more and more information about the lives of these moon scientists gets revealed. We learn about what killed them and the different types of relationships that they had with one another. And at the same time that we're learning this, their reincarnations, you know, the school kids are trying to track each other down to put the pieces of the story together, whilst also creating their own unique relationships with one another, although those do get influenced by the relationships of, you know, the moon scientists. In conclusion, I really enjoyed the OVA, but could also clearly see how much information was left out, and I do understand the reasoning behind it. You know, getting to learn a whole group of individuals who then also have connected past lives, which are now interfering with their current ones in just a handful of episodes, is quite a lot. And that's why it makes sense to me that this series is so long. So I think that in the end, this would have been far more enjoyable if I had been acquainted with the manga before. There were just so many names that I eventually had to look up a chart online to figure out everything, because also the moon scientists don't really have conventional names. Wow. This is definitely a manga I am going to be reading in the future. Also, the ending song slaps hard. I don't want to get a copyright strike or anything, but I'll leave a link in the description box below to like a YouTube link to the ED, so you can enjoy it. So yeah, also, like I said, this manga was a huge hit in Japan when it came out, and it got so bad that starting with volume 8, at the bottom of the first page of each volume, a disclaimer would be printed emphasizing that the story was completely fictional. And this is because Hiwatari started receiving letters from people who were claiming that their past lives were that of the moon scientist, or that they were from that same race. Apparently those letters were so disturbing that they had to put those disclaimers in the manga, which is absolutely wild to me. But hey, I guess we all learned some weird manga trivia today. So, it's the end of another anime season, which means that it's time again for me to attempt to watch anime series on a weekly basis. I skimmed through most of what is going to get aired, and I have to say that I'm a bit ambivalent. There's nothing in particular I'm really excited about. I mean, yes, Attack on Titan is finally coming to an end. It has been an 8-year journey for me personally. I know the ending already because I've read the manga, but I'd like to see how the anime ends up executing it. What's more is that I'm really excited to just, sit back and look at the discourse that I'm sure will run rampant once the show starts running, especially towards the end. From my understanding, for the manga readers, the end was really polarizing, so it's exciting to see the anime only watchers join in on that discussion. Besides that, I'm only really eager to get my hands on the Totsukuni no Shoujo, or The Girl on the Other Side, OVA. So this is the anime adaptation of the manga that was created by Nagabe. To give you a short summary, the story is set in a world where you have humans living in what they call the inside. Now, there is this curse that is transferable by touch and turns people into just ghastly black monsters. And so in an attempt for the rest of the humans to actually stay human, they try and kill and or banish the curse to the outside, so outside of the kingdom essentially. And this is also why these cursed people get referred to as outsiders. Also, side note, it seems that once someone gets cursed, they also lose the memories that they had from their past. Anyway, there is this outsider who finds a young girl called Shiva abandoned in the outside. She doesn't seem to have been touched or cursed in any way. And so this outsider, who gets called Sensei by Shiva, decides to take care of her as much as he can whilst trying his best not to ever touch her. So yeah, the story is about the two of them just trying to live in peace and avoid all the threats that come their way, which seem to be quite a lot. So that's the story. I picked up the manga about 2 years ago, and the manga now has 11 volumes in total and actually ended back in April. So I ended up reading all of them. The last volume I read in Japanese, since the English edition only came out this November. And, that wasn't really that good of an idea, to be honest, because a lot of important things in terms of the plot were explained in that last volume, and it was hard to grasp, to be honest. Mind you, I had a hard time grasping the stuff that was happening in volumes 9 and 10, and I read those in English, so I don't know why I still decided to give it a shot in Japanese. But yeah, I just think I was really eager to see how the story would end. But now I both have an English and Japanese copy of the 11th volume, so I am actually planning on just running through the entire series one day and just giving all my thoughts. So you'll probably hear me talking about that anywhere between episode, I'd like to say 9 and 12. Yeah, so the OVA is set to come out in March, and I think I'm just going to pre-order the DVD because it's actually part of this huge special edition that is kind of like a send-off for the series. Besides the OVA, there will also be a collection of short stories that were not included in the original series, and there's also a poster and a booklet filled with illustrations. So Mal doesn't say how long the OVA will be, but in the description of the special edition it gets referred to as chohen, so it should be a feature film. So I'm really hoping they would just cover the entire story. That would be great. And I'm just really excited for this, to be honest. It was animated by Wit Studio, and seeing the trailer, it really reminded me of its prequel, which was like this 10-minute short anime that came out about 2 years ago, I believe. Yeah, I watched it a couple of months back and really enjoyed it. I just really liked the style of that anime, and yeah, it's just cool to think that I'll be able to see like a feature-length anime in that style. Very exciting. I like how it really emulates the feeling that is in the manga. I don't even really know how to correctly describe the animation, but you know, it feels like very hand-drawn and a bit rough around the edges, which gives it a very homey feeling, if that makes sense. This was a terrible description, but I'm sure that I've like inserted stills or GIFs left or right somewhere on the screen. Then there's this other show that has piqued my interest, but now I feel like it could go either way, to be honest. It's called Sono Kisekae Ningyo o Koi o Suru. Wow, horrible Japanese. My Dress Up Darling is the English title. So it seems to center around two kids in secondary school. There's this guy called Gojo Wakana, who is a bit of a loner. He spends his time after school just working on dolls by himself. Then there's Kitagawa Marin, who seems to be, you know, the it girl of the school, very popular and stuff. Everyone likes her, all the guys are super into her. But then Marin finds Wakana sewing alone at school, and that's when she reveals that she has a secret hobby. It's cosplay. So I believe she then asks him to make cosplay costumes for her. So yeah, I watched the first trailer several weeks ago and it seemed very interesting. I hadn't actually gone out of my way at the time to look it up on Mal. I did the other day though, and that's when the second trailer came up. And that's also when I read the synopsis, and that's kind of like when I don't know, I kind of like started to get a weird feeling as if this was a story that I'd seen somewhere else before. And I can't really put my finger on it, but I remember watching a movie or a TV series a long time ago in which the it girl turns out to actually not be like other girls. She's a nerd, like, I don't know, a gamer or something really edgy. In any case, she has a hobby that is something totally not expected from her. So in the end, she's only willing to reveal this side of her to the loner of the school because, I don't know, they have the same hobby or whatever, or at least like somewhere in the same scope. And this is then the start of like a weird friendship type romance in which there will be, you know, a lot of turbulence, blah, 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 drama. So yeah, in the end, he feels like she's using him and she's hurt by this and thought that he would be different from all the other guys. And in the end, the relationship both drives them to be better human beings. The end. I am 100% sure that I've seen this movie or multiple versions of this movie at some point in my life. I can't pinpoint it at the moment. Please, someone throw me a movie that has this same premise. But I was getting those strong vibes in the second trailer. But you know, despite all of this, I am going to start watching the series with an open mind and just see how it will turn out, because I don't want to hold anything against the show without having even watched something of it, you know? So yeah, that's it. Anyway, moving on to some manga. So recently I caught up with Mashle, which is a manga that was created by Komoto Hajime, which I read on the Viz Media website, not sponsored. Anyway, I did an entire video about the series about a year ago, so if you want to hear my initial thoughts about it, you can check that one out. I'll leave a link in the description box. Anyway, to give you a quick summary of the manga, Mashle is a parody of One Punch Man and Harry Potter. So Mashle Burn Dead, I think, is born into a world of wizards and doesn't have a mark on his face. Now, people without a mark aren't wizards, and most of society feels that they should be disposed of because of that. This is why Mashle as a baby was abandoned by his parents. However, a dejected wizard finds him and decides to raise Mashle as his own. Now, I really like this manga. I love this manga. And coming back to it after several months, it was just an absolute treat to see how the manga progressed. And I'm very, very happy that Shonen Jump has kept this one, as they are known to be rather ruthless when it comes to ending series in their magazine. So I personally really love the silliness of the manga. The art is sometimes incredibly shit, but it's clearly done on purpose because sometimes there are fight scenes with nuts to guts or butts to guts. I don't know. You know what I mean. Full blown action scenes is what I mean. It's like all of It's like all of Komota's energy just goes to those couple of panels, and the rest is just really bad. But I honestly wouldn't have wanted it any other way. I've also found that the cast of Mashle's friends and just the characters in general have been steadily expanding, which also allows for even more parodies. For instance, there's this one dude who is like the parody of a shonen protagonist, which is also freaking hilarious since Mashle is part of Shonen Jump. He's just dead ass trolling all the other manga in the magazine. It's so funny. But what I really, really like about Mashle's friends, besides, you know, like their personalities, is how they don't all depend on Mashle to be their, you know, their ultimate savior. Many of them are OP themselves, which I think also makes the story so much more interesting. Besides all the shits and giggles, narratively speaking, the story is very strong. Many characters have their own arc and are continuously getting developed. And besides helping Mashle to reach his own goal, they themselves have, you know, dreams and aspirations and are fighting just as hard for those as well. Also, as the story progresses, the action scenes keep getting better and better as well. We also get to learn more about the magic system, which I personally think is really cool. So yeah, in a nutshell, the writing is really good, and the more I read, the more I find myself enjoying the story. Also, lastly, Innocent Zero is most definitely Voldemort, and his appearance makes that fucking hilarious. I just wanted to say that. He has no face. Anyway, moving on. I got a digital review copy from Simon & Schuster of Takahashi Rumiko's Kame the Mirror and Other Tales. So it's described as an anthology containing 5 magical realist stories that were created by Takahashi between 1999 and 2014, and none of them are connected. Now, I previously have never read anything by Takahashi. I had only watched one of her OVAs, so I didn't really know what to expect. In the end, I thought that this collection was quite alright. I wasn't particularly a fan of most of the stories, but I also didn't really hate any of them either. So, also they were surprisingly morbid though. So, the first story is about a group of people who have mirrors in their hands and are supposed to use these mirrors to suck out monsters that reside within people. And, those monsters cause these people to do all types of terrible stuff. Anyway, after having sucked out those monsters, they have to stomp these creatures to death, after which these creatures get purified by passing through these people's bodies and then out via their hand mirror. Apparently, this process is so horrifying that it makes the mirror hand person physically ill. I don't really know about this one. To be honest, I wasn't really vibing with it at all. So, yeah, I don't really know. I don't really have much to say about it. The second story, however, was pretty funny. So, it was about this has-been mangaka who receives a cursed doll and a letter from one of his old admirers. Now, the doll has 3 eyes in varying sizes, and the person wrote that if they were to cross out one of the eyes and say the name of someone, that person would get cursed. And so the way it works is that the bigger the eye, the worse the curse. So crossing out the biggest eye has the potential of actually killing someone. Now, this is a has-been mangaka, and he is pretty bitter. He consistently feels like he's getting slighted by the people around him. And so throughout the story, you get to see him contemplating who he should hurt or kill. So yeah, it's kind of morbid, but also very funny. I don't know, it's a weird type of humor, but it works in some way. The third story actually has a similar vibe to it, and I like that one as well. So it's about an actress who thinks that she's killed someone by pushing them down a flight of stairs. Yeah, so she decides to flee and kill herself. And it's so absurd and morbid at the same time. For some reason, it's funny. I think the best way I can describe this humor is that it's that of a funny sitcom where someone behind the scenes said, you know what would make the show even funnier? Murder. Yes, that's what we need. So yeah, very absurd, but also quite enjoyable. Also, at the end of the manga, there's this non-fiction one-shot which Takahashi created together with Adachi Mitsuru, and it essentially entails both of their paths to becoming mangaka and working for Shonen Sunday. And yeah, I thought that was pretty neat. I ended up, because of that, checking out Takahashi's MAL profile, and dear gosh, her catalogue is insane. I knew about Inuyasha, how popular that was, and Urusei Yatsura, and I'd also seen Maison Ikoku and a couple of other ones, but I didn't know how much work she actually made. It's an insane amount. And also the amount of adaptations as well is just incredible. So yeah, I don't know. I think it would be really cool to check some of her work out, or at least more of her work. I'm definitely aiming to watch some Maison Ikoku because I recently got an emulator and found an old game from the 90s that is centered around that story, and yeah, I just thought it was pretty cool. Anyway, that's about it in terms of Takahashi. I am actually currently working on a manga recommendation video, and I ended up rereading this manga, this one-shot that I read last year, I believe, called Claudine by Ikeda Ryoko. Now, I've talked about Ikeda before, as she is such an iconic mangaka, being the creator of both The Rosa for Saya and Onisama-e, and quite frankly, tons of other really interesting manga. Ikeda is known for being one of the women who really revolutionized shoujo manga back in like the late 60s, 70s and onward. And in her work, she has many times over explored gender and sexuality, and the same goes for this particular manga. Like I said, this is a one-shot, and it's from the 70s, and actually one of the first manga in which the main character is transgender. Now, I do want to give a content note here, because during the 70s, when it came to LGBTQ+ material, the tragedy trope was a huge thing. I still haven't found out why this was the case in particular. It could have just been a trend, or, and this seems more likely to me, it might have been a prerequisite for those works to even get published, like something similar to the Hays Code in the US film industry. But yeah, Claudine is one of those manga that follows that trope. The main character, Claudine, is someone who was assigned female at birth but identifies as male. Now, the story is set in France, which is very typical of shoujo manga from that time as well. Western, in particular German, French and British culture, with a focus on the upper class or upper echelon of society, was heavily featured and romanticized in these manga. In any case, the story is told from the perspective of Claudine's psychologist. He recounts their first meeting and how Claudine eventually agreed to become his patient. This is then followed by him telling the story of Claudine's life and what eventually happened to him. I thought this was a really fascinating story, especially in terms of its position within the history of manga. This just had to be incredibly revolutionary at the time, especially when you consider the varying attitudes towards Claudine's transness. I mean, his mother, for instance, rejects it completely, which is why Claudine in the first place ended up going to the psychologist. However, his father accepts it wholeheartedly and doesn't see it as an issue whatsoever. What's more is that he likes Claudine a lot and really sees him as a son. And besides those two sides of the spectrum, you also have others who see Claudine just as some sort of spectacle. In any case, like I said before, I found this to be a fascinating read, and the artwork was absolutely stunning. It was classic shoujo with a very Art Nouveau feel to it. Sorry, that was cringy. Anyway, I recently read the first 4 volumes of this science fiction manga called Number 5 by Matsumoto Taiyo. You may know Matsumoto from some of his other works like Ping Pong and Sunny, or just even from his art style alone, since, it's quite different from your run-of-the-mill manga. This, by the way, was the first time I actually read any of his work. So the story is set in a distant future in which over 70% of the world has become just this harsh desert. There's also this new race of superhumans that was created by a group of people, and a couple of these superhumans became the so-called Rainbow Brigade, in which each member is referred to by their rank number. Now, all the members in the brigade are psychologically connected to one another, and they as a group have the task to keep the peace around what is left of the world. They do so by leading the so-called Peace Corps, or corpse, I don't know. Anyway, every member is the head of their own platoon. Now, in this story, something has gone absolutely and utterly wrong, because the Rainbow Brigade's best marksman, I can't speak. Okay, let me just say this again. So something incredibly wrong has gone on, because the Rainbow Brigade's best marksman, i.e. number 5, has gone completely rogue. He is now on the run and has abducted a woman that looks like one of those matryoshka dolls. She also gets referred to that, by the way. Anyway, whilst on the run, he kills several of his brigade members who are trying to catch up with him. And so that's kind of like the main premise of the manga. So after reading the first 100 pages, I had no freaking idea what was going on. This is a really weird story, and it takes a lot of time to actually understand what's going on. Usually I'm really into stuff that feels very idiosyncratic, unique, idiosyncratic, you know what I mean, unique. So, you know, manga with a very distinctive style, but at the start, I definitely felt that this manga was a bit too obscure or abstract for my taste. Also, because of the art style, it was sometimes hard to discern what exactly was going on and who was who. And so sometimes I really had to rack my brain over all these panels trying to figure out what the heck is actually going on. So yeah, I don't think I could even read the original Japanese version, but luckily Viz is publishing this series rather quickly. Again, I'm not sponsored, but yeah, there are 8 volumes in total, but Viz is publishing them 2 in 1, with the 3rd volume coming out in January and the final one in April. And I'm going to try and get a hold of those because as the story progressed, I got more and more interested in what exactly was happening. And granted, I could not tell you what type of deep things this manga is all about. There's some weird stuff with like an inventor in a bunny suit, but honestly, I have no idea. But I would really like to see the series through, you know, and find out what the conclusion is, and maybe I can, you know, by going over it a couple of times, can find some sense in it. But I don't know. Who knows? We'll see. Finally, I would just like to talk a little bit about the manga Maiko-San Chi no Makanai-San by Koyama Aiko. So there hasn't been an English release yet, but the English title is Kyo in Kyoto from the Maiko house. So a Maiko is an apprentice geisha in either Kyoto or Western Japan. This manga is a slice of life / cooking series about a 16-year-old girl named Kyo. Kyo is from Aomori, which is a prefecture in the northern part of Japan. I believe also very well known for their apples. In any case, she and her best friend Sumi decide to move to Kyoto to become geishas. However, Kyo drops out rather quickly because she's just far too clumsy and can't really keep up with the classes. Now, through a series of coincidences, however, she ends up becoming the cook of the lodge where all the apprentices live. And I have to tell you, this is such a feel-good manga. If you ever need a pick-me-up, this is the way to go. The story just exudes warm, cozy, and comforting vibes. The art style is incredibly rustic, giving a very nostalgic feel as well. And the main character, Kyo, is absolutely the sweetest and warmest person I've ever seen, a character I've ever come across. Oh my gosh, she is just so sweet. She's always rooting for people, trying her best to do even like tiny things that will help them feel better. For instance, she is always keeping out an eye for her best friend Sumi, making sure that she gets the right nutrition so that she can keep up with her demanding practice. Also, at some point, one of the teachers visits the house mother, so the woman who takes care of all of the apprentices. And the teacher talks about just how amazing Sumi is. Kyo eventually enters the room to serve them cookies and coffee, and that's when the teacher is reminded of how Kyo was that one terrible student that immediately dropped out. And so for some reason the teacher immediately makes this slight towards Kyo, talking about how amazing and capable her friend Sumi is. And so of course this teacher is just saying this in order to make Kyo feel bad or jealous, but when she looks at Kyo's face, she's just like, oh my gosh, she's just like in awe of how amazing her friend is. And I'm like, oh, Kyo's a real one. And the teacher is just clearly weirded out by her behavior and calls her weird eventually. But hey, let's be honest, I feel like anyone would like to have such a high value friend as Kyo. Besides this, the food that Kyo makes also looks incredibly delicious. I mean, if I even remotely had any cooking skills, I would have certainly tried out some of the stuff that she makes, because it looks like it would slap hard. But yeah, what else do I have to say about this manga? Another thing that I really like about the manga is that you actually get to see what it entails to become a geisha, because I previously had no idea that so much hard work actually goes into it. You know, my appreciation for the profession has definitely increased. In any case, there are currently 18 volumes out now, and there might not be an English edition out yet, but there is an anime. And this started airing, I believe, back in February, but the releases are so darn slow, I decided to just wait for the entire series to be done in order to watch it in one go. The frequency is one episode per month or so, and I think the last episode will be at the end of January, so I'll give it a go then. I have seen the first 2 episodes and it looks actually quite neat. However, I do have to say that I'm not really vibing all that much with the CGI in this one. It's not that I'm necessarily against CGI. I mean, I just spoke about how much I really liked the CGI in Mieruko-chan. But the thing for me is that I don't think that CGI really fits the style of this series. Like I said, the manga had an incredibly vintage and nostalgic feel to it, and I feel that the CGI really took away from that and made the anime, I don't know, a bit colder, if that makes any sense. Nevertheless, I'll give my thoughts again once I have finished the show. So now we have finally arrived at the last segment of this podcast, which is Ask an Otaku. So if you have an otaku related question you'd like to ask me, leave it in the comment section below with the hashtag #AskAnOtaku, and I'll try and answer it in any of the next few episodes. Yeah. So today's question comes from Luanda Olivia, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. So it says, I'd love to hear your thoughts on Shoujo Kakume Utena, the anime especially, and yes, keep the podcast coming. Thank you so much. So to be honest, I actually haven't watched the anime, but actually quite recently I read the manga together with some of my patrons over on Discord, and to be honest, I was a bit disappointed. I don't know what I was like actually specifically expecting, but I just felt kind of bored reading it. But who knows, maybe the anime is different though. I do know that a lot of people prefer the anime, but yeah, I will try and watch it maybe like in a couple of weeks, and then you'll see it featured on one of these episodes. In any case, thank you so much for hanging out with me and listening to what I had to say this week. If you'd like to support me, you can do so by joining my Patreon or leaving me a little coffee over at ko-fi.com. All the links are in the description box down below. And yeah, as always, again, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in another episode. Cheers!